Okay, so last time we started on our whole, and this happens sometimes. I start rethinking the game a little bit and the way that we were programming this, and I think we need to backtrack a little bit and program this a little tiny bit different because it was starting to get too difficult. And this kind of shows you how programming goes. You'll start an iteration in your programming, and then you have to back up and redo something because it's not working right. Okay? So I was thinking, okay, these holes are going to be too difficult to manage with the moles, and it was just too much to manage. We need to think of it in a simpler way, and we're going to redo some of this, okay? But not too bad, right? And that's how programming goes. You know, I talked to different programmers, and I was talking to this one guy. I don't know if I told you this story. At the GDC, we were talking to a person who wrote the IDE, so the Integrated Development Environment, for the people who wrote Candy Crush. So they made the tool for Candy Crush. And this guy said, I asked him how many lines of code he wrote, you know, to make this IDE, and he said he wrote over 900,000 lines of code. But now it's down to 600,000 lines. So he erased, you know, in the process of creating all that code, he had to erase about a third of it. Okay, so sometimes when you're programming, you know, you have to back up, and, you know, that's like a normal process. And did I tell you the story? He also said that he lost feeling in his arm. Did I guys tell you that? Oh, yeah. So he said he was programming at one point 12 to 18 hours a day. Okay, he was just programming. And he said at one point he lost feeling in his arm. And then he had to stop programming for about a week till the feeling came back in his arm. So remember to keep working out when you're programming a lot, right? Keep the muscles up, the stress balls. Yeah. Game development conference is always that first week in March. We brought a few students from our computer science club. Karen, Deep, and Gabriel, and my daughter Jordan went with us. And we'll do that every year. We hope to get funding next year. So then I put in for funding for it, so then it'll pay for a lot of it. So it's that first week in March, so we go on that Friday. We go on the student day, the expo day. Yeah, it's really fun. It's very educational because you can ask programmers. They really are open to students and teachers, and they like to talk about what they do, and you can ask them questions about what programming languages they use, how they coded it, you know, stuff like how many lines of code did you write, how many months did you work on it, what they're doing, you know. A lot of them just work on little parts of things, you know, like this guy just made the IDE, and then this person I've met people who worked on the assembly language part of Halo for a certain weapon. So like in Halo, there's people who are for this weapon or for this character. There's a group of people that just specialize in that. And there was a person I met who just worked on optimizing the assembly language for a certain weapon in Halo. So he's very specific in what he did, you know? And so you can see what kind of jobs are out there and what people do. It's actually pretty cool, you know? So, all right. So in rethinking our game, I think we should program it like this. This way works. So before we had our holes separated from our moles. So, you know, we made our hole objects, and then we made our mole objects, and then we were trying to match up the hole objects with the mole objects, and it was starting to get confusing, who's in what hole, and keeping that separated wasn't a good idea. So what we need to do is assign each mole to their own hole. Okay? I'm not a very good artist, but all right. So each mole is going to have their own hole. And so each mole has to remember what hole they're at. And if each mole has their own hole, then we only have to manage the mole and we don't have to manage the holes. Okay? And it'll be a lot easier to program. Okay? Because then we're not having two separate vectors. We'll have one vector of moles and they just remember which hole they're inside of. It makes a lot more sense. And when I thought of that, I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense than the way that we were trying to go about it before. Okay? So we're going to fix up that mole class so each mole is assigned a hole. Then we'll add a click event to each mole. So each mole will have a click event assigned to them, so that when we click on them, we can give the user a point, okay, and make the mole disappear. Okay, and then we can keep track of our points. And then when we translate this to the ePad, the click event will translate to the tap event. Okay, so then they can use their finger and tap instead. Now, if you made your mouse into a hammer, it should still work. We might have to modify it a little bit, but it should still work. So on the PC, the mouse can be like a hammer, right? But on the ePad, there's no, mouse, and so we only want the click event or tap event to be on the ePad. So we're going to program it for the click event first, and then if you guys made your mouse into a hammer, we'll make sure that works, and then maybe modify it a little bit. Okay, and then we should actually finish up this part of our game, and then we definitely need to add some sound. So you guys can start on your sound today. We need some sound for our games. This one would be a lot funner with lots of cute sounds. So then you can start looking for sounds. Okay, sounds, you can do any kinds of sounds. You can have background music, or if you want, you can have, a whacking sound. And maybe like a squeak sound when he gets hit. Okay, squeak sound. That's how you spell squeak. All right. And you can think of or you can go and look for free sounds online and start acquiring them. And I thought we could add the sounds. I'll do a little lecture on sounds so that we get it right. We'll do our sounds on Monday. Okay, but you start looking and acquiring your sounds, so then they'll be ready to go Monday. Okay, so get all your sounds together. So then you can use your own sounds. All right. And because before when we were doing sounds on the ePad, so, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but sometimes when you stop your game, the sounds are still playing. So we need to do sounds a little bit better so that they stop playing when we close it. All right. But it's not very hard. It's just adding those sound objects, adding a sound channel, and then just making sure we shut down the sound channel when we stop playing. Okay? All right. But, okay, so let's fix our mole objects first. We'll add the click event. We'll test it, make sure it works. Then you guys can work on getting your points working, and then you can get your sounds acquired. Okay, that's our plan for today. All right, so let's start coding. Sorry, she got her paw stuck, but she's okay. Cool. So we're going to start with the modification of our mole class, and then we'll modify our whack-a-mole class. So we're going to modify our mole class again, and we're going to make him work a little bit better. So make sure your flaw is open, and then right-click on your mole movie clip object. Go to his properties. And then you can hit that pencil icon, and that way you make sure you're opening up the right mole.as file. So we're going to modify our mole class. Remember, this is our mole class. All right. So what we want to do is we want to add some intelligence to our mole so he remembers which hole he's at. Okay, so we need to add some instance variables to our mole so that he can remember when we go back to him where his hole is. So we're going to give each mole their own hole. Okay. And so we're going to add a couple more instance variables here. And one to store his X position. And that'll be a number type. And then we'll add a second instance variable to our mole class to remember, of course, his Y position. So that way, when we make him disappear, he'll be out in outer space. That we're still going to keep it that way. But when he appears, we're going to make him appear at his hole. So we're going to keep that hole information as part of the mole object. See how that makes better sense? So that way we don't have to manage these holes. The moles know which hole they're supposed to pop up in. And we'll make just enough moles to fill our holes. we're modifying our classes a little bit. We came in late. We decided to back up a little bit and change our code a little bit because the holes and the moles were too hard to manage separately. So we're going to put the hole information inside of the mole. So each mole will have their own hole. It's like a Dr. Seuss day. Mole hole. Just kidding. I think that's why I like this class. It's fun to like say that stuff, right? All right, so give each mole their x position and y position. Okay. The constructor, we can leave how it is. We can leave these how they are. Now when they appear, this is where we're going to change it a little bit. When they appear, we don't need to know where they're going to appear because we already know where they're going to appear. They're going to appear in the x position and the y position. So I'm going to get rid of those parameters. So we have to break our code to fix our code. So we're going to take away those parameters because, and then we're going to give this guy an x position and a y position. Position. Make sure I spell it right. And actually copy this code. Actually, we could leave it. Well, actually, we need to construct him a little bit. So we're going to copy that code and put it in our constructor. And actually, we're going to give it the parameters up here so that when we construct him is when we tell him where he should be. So remember that when we create this guy or construct him, we'll set those values there. And then they'll be permanent. So when we construct him, he'll know what hole he's at, and then it won't be able to change that hole unless we make a new mole. All right. So does that make sense? So when we make the mole, he'll know which hole he's supposed to be at, because we're going to tell him which x and y value he's supposed to be at. When we make him disappear, he can still disappear out here, and then when we make him appear, he knows which hole he's at, because we set those values in the constructor. Okay, does that make sense how we did that? It's much easier, right? Much better way to program that. So Control S or save that. Okay, so again, what we changed is we add these two instance variables. We added some parameters to our constructor. We set the x and y. Oh, actually, sorry. I just noticed that we programmed that a little bit wrong. Sorry. Wasn't thinking. It's supposed to look like this. We set the x and y, or x position, y position to what we passed in. Sometimes I program and don't think things through. So note that we're setting the instance variables here. We need to set our instance variables to what we passed in as the parameters. That makes sense now, right? Much better sense. You guys were like, what? Okay. So we're setting the instance variable. So now each mole has a memory, right? Each mole can remember which hole they're at. When you set instance variables to a value in the constructor, they're remembering those values. So when we come back to mole, he'll know where his hole is. Okay. All right. Much better. And I had that written down right here too. So check that off. Here, set these values. All right. Cool. So now I think our constructor is right. Give it one last look over. Make sure you kind of understand what's going on in here. Any questions on this guy, actually? Everybody kind of understands what we're doing in there? All right. So we'll save him. Remember to do Control S and save that guy. And now we need to modify our game file to use this new mole constructor. All right. So we're going to modify our whack-a-mole file, whack-a-mole.as file. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of those guys. So I had some whole objects in there before. I'm not going to need those anymore because now I don't need to keep track of my holes. My moles are going to keep track of my holes. Unless, of course, you added your holes through the code, then you'll want to keep it. But what I did is I just added my holes to my flaw file. And that's fine. They can just stay there. They're going to be static. They're not going to move or change. They can just be part of the background. I just need to know their XY position. Okay, so I left those on there. So I don't need these instance variables anymore. I'm not going to change the holes in any way. They're not going to move. I'm not going to modify them. Like a picture? That's fine too. Okay, yeah. Because your background will appear later. So it could be a static background. And then we'll figure out how to find the X and Y position. We can just use an object and draw it on top of it to find its XY position. So you just need to know the XY position in the background. They could be just a flat object, so this could just be a picture too. This, you know, I saw a lot of you had pictures, so that's why we kind of rethought it too. A lot of you just had a flat picture. So that's fine too. You could just have a flat picture with just pictures of holes, and that's fine. We just need to know their XY position of where that is. So, yeah, so that'll work still. So no longer hole objects over here. We don't need hole objects. We got rid of those. So I'm going to get rid of my hole objects here. Remember, I constructed them. We started going down that route. We rethought things. So I'm going to get rid of those. All right. Now here's where we're going to modify things a little bit. Now we're going to add our moles separate. I'm going to add one mole to each hole. And each mole is going to have their own hole and not switch holes, not move holes. They're only going to appear in their hole. So I'm going to use 6 moles for mine. If you have 10 holes, you'd use 10. If you have 4 holes, you'd have 4 moles. Okay, I'm going to do the first couple, and then you guys could do the rest. Right? But we're going to construct them where we know their XY positions. All right. So remember that in our constructor, this is our constructor for our mole object. We now have 2 parameters, the X value and the Y value. So when I call my constructor right here, I'm going to copy and paste this code right here. When I construct mole number 1, in fact, we can even give these guys names. So this will be my mole 1. When I construct mole 1, I'm going to need to give him his X position and his Y position. When I construct mole 2, I'll give him his X position and Y position, and so on and so forth. To mole N, then I'll give him his X position and Y position. So I need to figure out my X and Y positions. Now, if you have an object like this, the X position and Y position are in the Properties panel. So I would write down these X position and Y position, 159 and 147, right here. They're X position, Y position. Now, if yours is a flat file, what I would suggest doing is just, like, let's say yours is a picture. And just for demonstration purposes, let me just download a picture of whack-a-mole. Whack-a-mole, let's say background. So let's say yours was a static picture like this. Here's how I would find the X position and Y position of this static picture. I would just take an object. You can delete this after. Take like the oval tool. Draw it out there. Oh, and it went underneath the picture. So if yours went underneath the picture, you could add a new layer. Put it on top of the picture layer and then draw that hole. Control G. And then look at his X position and Y position. Now this hole's X position, Y position is the top left-hand corner. So since I'm just using this as a tool, I could just put the top left corner where I want that mole to appear. Then go over here to his Properties panel, and voila, I can figure out his XY value. Do you see how I'm just using that? And then I can delete it after. I'm just going to use that oval to figure out what XY position it's at. I mean, you could guess too, but it's easier just to use that to figure it out. Okay, so figure out your XY positions to your holes. Figure out a couple. I'm just going to do a couple, and then you guys will be in charge of the rest, right? So we'll figure out this guy. Maybe we'll figure out 3 here. And then I would just write them down or copy paste them into Notepad or somewhere. Okay, so you know your XY positions. Remember, if you get it wrong, no big deal. You just change it after, right? All right. So then I come over here, and when I'm constructing him, so this is my mole 1, I'm going to give it that X position and Y position. And again, remember what that does. This calls the mole constructor over here, our newly made mole constructor. Oops. So we had this mole constructor, and now our mole constructor is going to remember where he's supposed to show up when he shows up, because it remembers it in these instance variables, which makes a lot more sense. All right, so that's mole 1. Now after I construct him, I want to push him into, actually I'm going to name him mole 1. I'm going to push mole 1 into my vector, so I'm still going to have my vector to keep track of my moles, so I want to push that guy into the vector so he keeps track of him for me. And then I'm still going to add him to the stage, so make sure you put mole 1 here, and I'm still going to make him disappear, because we don't want him to show up yet. Now this is the cool part, right? Now we get to copy and paste some code. I'm going to do this for every mole object. And you can't really do this part in a loop because each mole object is going to be constructed with their own XY coordinates, so we need to construct them separately. So this guy will be 375 and 147. Now note that I named him a different object, so I'm constructing mole 2 now. I'm pushing mole 2, I'm adding the child mole 2, and I'm making mole 2 disappear. So make sure you number them differently. Okay, so that way they're all separate mole objects. They're all going to be individual moles. Now you'll want to do that for how many holes you have. Remember, if you have 10 holes, you'll want to copy and paste this code 10 times. If you have 4 moles, you'll copy and paste the code 4 times, right? I have 6 holes, I would copy and paste it 6 times and add 6 moles to my vector. Right. Now, even if you got a couple in there, we can still test that it works. So let's move on, and then you can add the rest of the moles later, okay? So just get a couple, and then we'll add the rest of them when I give you guys time to work on your stuff individually, right? You can add the rest in a second. All right. Now we're still going to keep this for loop because there's something that we need to do to every mole. And what we need to do to every mole is we need to loop to add a click event listener function to all of our moles. And so that's something we can do inside of a loop because we could add that click listener event function to all of our, well actually, yeah, we wanted to add that click listener event function to all of our moles, right? All right. So we're going to loop over our, let's make this a for each loop actually. And Let me copy our for each loop somewhere in here. All right, so for each mole object in our vector moles, let's add an event listener. So we'll say m dot add event listener for our mouse dot click event. And then we'll call the mole hit function. Okay, so that makes sense because we're going to add, all our moles are going to have that click, so then it'll translate to a tap on our ePads. And so they're all going to listen, and when a mole is hit, he's going to call that mole hit function. So of course we need to write the mole hit function. Okay, so let's write our mole hit function, and then we're going to modify this code a little bit. And we'll just kind of write it pretty simple for right now. So remember to write this function outside of any other function. I'm just going to put it right after the constructor. Remember that you can label your ending curly bracket. The name of the function is going to be mole hit. This is now going to be a mouse event. So what I was doing right now is I was looking at our API for our event. So what we need to do in this method is we need to know which mole was hit, right? How are we going to know which mole is hit? What information is sent to this method? The only information that is sent to this method is the mouse event. So the mouse event can tell us which mole called the event. Okay, so which object got clicked is going to be inside of that mouse event. Mouse event knows who was clicked. Okay, so what I did is I went to our API. I need to get a hold of that object, so I need to know what to put right here. So this mouse event is going to tell us which object it is. So I went to the API. It's good to know how to do this stuff. And I went to the mouse event class. And in my mouse event class, I didn't see what I was looking for. So here's my properties in my mouse event class. And it has some cool stuff. It says where the mouse was clicked, you know, where on the stage it was clicked, stuff like that. And I didn't see what I was looking for. So if I go up here, I can see, okay, mouse event is inherited from the event class. So he has all the properties of an event. So when I go to my event class, they'll probably find the property I'm looking for. So I went to my event class, and I'm looking in here for my properties. And here's a current target property. It says the object that is actively processing the event object with an event listener. So this is my current target. That's what will be my mole. Okay. So this property is part of that event. So I need to use my dot operator, and I can call him up. A current target is a mole object. And so I can tell that mole object to disappear. Now, I might have to typecast him to a mole object, but let's try it this way first. And disappear, remember, is in our mole class, so all moles know how to disappear. In fact, you can even go in here, Control C and copy that, Control V and paste it so you know you got your spelling right. We'll leave that there. Other things that you'll want in here is up the score. I'm not going to write that code for you. You guys will be smart enough to write that, up the score, and then rewrite your score. And then on Monday, we'll figure out how to play a sound, play a hitting sound in here. Your hitting sounds inside of this function, because every time he's hit, this function is going to be called, so it makes sense that we'll up the score and play hitting sounds in here. Okay, so I'm just going to write some notes to myself that needs to get in there. That's not my to-do list. Okay. But we'll just make him disappear for now. Okay, on our on-enter frame event here, let's change it up because we added our moles differently this time. And we don't need to change a lot of it. A lot of this logic is going to stay the same. So we still are going to make a random number to see if we need to add a mole to the stage. We'll still add a mole. And remember, we can change this numbers to add moles more rapidly or less rapidly. We can leave that. We can still loop through our vector that's holding our mole objects. And we can still check if he's being used or not. If he's not being used, we can add him. Now here's where we can change things up. So we don't have to have this logic in here anymore. So we actually can delete this stuff. Since we made our code more simple. And he's going to appear not at a random hole, he's going to appear at his or her hole. So whether your mole's a boy or a girl, right? So they're going to appear at their own hole. Okay. And he already knows which hole is his, so we don't need to tell him which hole is his. So we're just going to tell him to appear. Voila, he'll appear, and he knows where to go because we told him which hole was his. Isn't that nice? Much easier. We don't have to manage those holes. Now let's make sure I got my curly brackets right. We can label these things. So here's my here's my if. You can even label them. We don't need this guy anymore, right? So remember, you have one for your if statement. We'll have one curly bracket for our for loop. This curly bracket matches that if statement. And then we have the end of our function. This is why I say label your curly brackets. Look at all those curly brackets. And then if you use proper indentation, it helps you line them up too. All right. Oh, and then last but not least, we need to add that mouse event class since we're using Mr. Mouse Event here. If you didn't do the import for a mouse event, make sure you import a mouse event so then he knows what that code means. So up here in your events, you can import the mouse event class in the events library. Yes?
Do I see all these add event listeners?
So we have this one here, and then the only other one I have is on my enter frame event.
Hold on, go down a bit more.
Our code is actually pretty simple. We got the constructor and then just two functions. That's it.
So what is that for each loop? Did you just add that earlier?
Oh, in the constructor, we just changed, so we're not adding the moles separate. I mean, we're not adding the moles all at once. We just added them separately. So as for each loop, just adds click events to all of our mole objects. So then they each have that click event. And did I? Oh, this is a mouse event, right? Sorry. Mouse event. They're appearing at the same time. So we're going to have to change that up a little bit. But they are appearing. We just need to make them appear separately, right? So all we need is like a break statement in there. So once we make one appear, let's break out of here so that more don't appear in the same location. So notice that this for loop is iterating, and so then it's making all the moles appear all at the same time. That would be kind of a fun game, right? They all appear at once. But if we break out of there, then they won't all appear at once, right? So there one appears, one appears. Oh. Did the other one ever appear? Maybe I need to make my random a little bit less. I'm going to change that to 7. Make them appear a little bit more frequently. Oh, so now they're appearing at different times. Maybe 7 was too much, though. They're a little bit off. Okay.
Do you have the go to play the first frame in there? Because once they appear, they'll appear whatever frame they're going at.
No, I didn't make them. Oh, I see. So you put a stop on the first frame, huh? Good idea. So we need to change that up a little bit. Okay, it seems to be working, so that's good. Awesome. Much easier to program, right? Keeping the holes with the moles. And actually, Peter had a very observant what's that? I don't know. He figured out the mole here. We need to tell it to stop on that first timeline, right? We need to tell it to stop on his first frame and then play when he wants to be played. Because it's true. Because they're over here in outer space, they're playing, and so then when we make them appear, they're in the middle of their play, and then it looks like it's jumpy. Does everyone see that? They're over here playing. We didn't tell them to stop on the timeline. Unless you did tell them to stop on the timeline, which would be good. When I made my mole, I didn't make him stop on the timeline. So I'm going to double click on my mole, and I'm going to add a stop to this timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another keyframe on the second keyframe. And then on the first keyframe, make sure this is your A layer. In your actions, you can tell him to stop. So then on frame 1, he's gonna be in the hold position, right? And then when I tell him to play, he'll play. Actually, you know what else I need? I need a frame right here. Because when I tell him to go and play frame 2, he's already going to be here and he's going to skip one of my frames. In fact, I shouldn't put frame 2. I should make another layer and name that layer to be proper. So let's do that. We'll add another layer. We'll call it our labels layer. We'll follow the methodology we did in our other games. I'll add a keyframe to frame 2 on my labels layer. And in the property of that labels layer, I'll call it the play. Or, what should I call him? We'll call him play. And then on this layer, I want to add there we go. I inserted one more frame. So I right-clicked on here, inserted one more frame right there. So then when he goes to play, I'm not skipping one of my frames. And then I'll just need to move these guys over a little bit. Voila. I'll leave this one up here a little bit. So what did we change? I added stop on the first frame. So remember that you can only add code on your frames that are a keyframe. So on that first frame, I made it a keyframe. I put stop on there. Then I added this labels layer. And on the second frame, in my labels layer, I added a keyframe. And I named it play. And then on my third layer, I right-clicked and told it to insert a frame so that it, won't skip one of my frames. And remember, if you want this animation to last longer, you could add some more keyframes down here. You could add some more frames down here. So now he should play a little bit nicer. Oh, it didn't like my label play. I knew it wouldn't like that. In my head, it didn't like that. So we'll call him Play Mole. Or maybe we should tell him to come up. Come up. Arise. I'll call it my come up. Maybe that's a bad whatever. Okay. So then in here, in our code, when he appears, tell him to go to and play on that label. Remember to name it what you named it in the string. So then he'll go to and play, because remember he stopped, and now he'll go to and play, and he'll play himself coming up and coming down. There we go. Aren't they cute? Now remember, if you want them to come up a little bit slower, just change this number. In fact, you can make this number a variable, and you can make it smaller and they come up faster, and maybe that could be the harder levels if you want to do levels. Right? Oh, aren't they nice? See, that plays much better. Now only 2 are coming up because that's the only 2 I added. So remember that you got to add the rest of your moles in here, and then the rest will start to pop up. Okay, so you could add the rest of your moles in there. Then you could play around with this number. I also wanted you guys to keep a score, which you probably already have your score. So then you could add that score code right here. Okay, so things to work on today. Add the rest of your moles. Add your score. either make this number a variable or play around with this number. And then last but not least, find some cool sounds you want to use, because we definitely need to add sound to this game. This game is much funner with sound. So find some cool sounds that you want to use. And you guys should have your start screen working. So I didn't put my start screen because that was something I wanted you guys to program on your own, so I did not want to put that in there. You guys should have your start screen working. Look how many will. Now remember, if they're popping up too frequently, it might be kind of fun. Okay. But remember that you could make this number a variable, and then every time they hit a certain score, you could check that score right here. Every time they hit a certain score, you could make this number smaller, and then they'll pop up faster and faster and faster, and it'd be like kind of a fun game. Every time they hit like 5, make them pop up faster, you know, by making that variable smaller. See how we can make that a little bit better? Because I do want you to make at least one improvement on your game. You should have the start button, and then one improvement on your game would be a timer. So if you already have a timer, you already have that improvement. You can make multiple improvements, but you have to have at least one improvement on your game other than what we coded here. Okay, so you could have a timer. You can make this guy a variable. You can think of another way to improve your game. Okay. But much easier to program by kind of rethinking our holes and making them part of the mole, right? Yeah. So a lot of times we do have to back up when we're coding and rethink things. All right, I'll leave this guy. So now I kind of want you guys to work on your own. Get the rest of this game working. So add the rest of your moles, scores, number, and then sounds. So you guys have a list of tasks, all right? So I'm going to stop recording. Aw.